Welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. Inside the Set is a series that focuses on the design and decor of stories that excite us and ignite our imaginations, where we get to discuss the collaborations between production designers and set decorators, and hear firsthand accounts of how those works of art came to be, from their inception, ideas on a page, through completion, where we sit in the dark and experience them collectively.
Welcome to this edition of Inside the Set with Set Decor. I'm Claire Kaufman SDSA, and I have the pleasure of speaking today with set decorator Lisa Clark SDSA and production designer Jess Kendler about the hit series for Amazon, Daisy Jones and the Six. Based on the best-selling novel by Taylor Jenkins Reid, the show follows the rise and ultimate fall of a fictitious band during the 1970s. So guys, first off, I'd like to say a huge congrats. The show is fantastic from beginning to end. I mean, when I read the book, I thought, what an amazing show this will make. And you guys have just nailed the look and feel of that era. I mean, every house, every hotel room, every stadium set, it just is so well executed. So big congrats.
Thank you, Claire. That means a lot coming from you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Just starting with you, how did you get involved with the project?
When we were doing Little Fires, the president of Hello Sunshine came up to me when we were in our very first episode and was like, how do you feel about the 70s? And I was like, I love the 70s. And she was like, here's a book. I want you to read it tonight. Tell me what you think. And that was the start of it.
And Lisa, have you guys collaborated before? Because I have to say the relationship between the design and the decorating is just flawless on all levels.
Thank you. We've worked together for over 5 years. I think we have a really strong collaborative relationship. And we've gotten to that place where we really, you know, how you don't have to necessarily use the words. You can sort of, you have a second language with the designer. So I feel that we have that and that we really brought it to the table on this show.
Oh, absolutely. What was the research process for you guys?
For me, what I had the art department do, and it's the first time ever that we had like an entire like file cabinet of research, but essentially we created this Bible because very soon into the design, we realized we were going to be doing a lot of location heavy work. And when we were in LA, we were going to shoot the LA icons that you see on screen. So we got this binder of research that would list every location we were referencing, showing it in the 60s, showing it in the 70s, and showing it today. So we had a flip book, even when we would leave scouting, to look back at like, here's what it is. How do we get it to what it was? And that was sort of the beginning of it all.
It was an impressive book. I would say it was something like 200 pages. And because the show spanned from about 1968 to 1975, it was really important to pinpoint those changes in time. One of the things I was really excited about, I was a former history graduate student, so I love research. And it was really exciting for me to be able to have the time to dive into research of the period. So Jess, of course, had this huge catalog of research that we used as a jumping off point. And we spent a lot of time also looking at the environments of the bands of the era. So we had pictures of Joni Mitchell in her house and Fleetwood Mac, and we tried to reference that in our design and decor throughout the show. Every character had its own packet of research that went along with it. Like for the Teddy Price character, we did a ton of research on Quincy Jones and the record labels of the time. And it was a big part of our process on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it shows for sure. I'd love to talk about the band's first house in Laurel Canyon. Was that a location or a built set or a combination of the both?
So the actual house is a location, and that we searched for that literally for months. And we happened to find a house that's nowhere near Laurel Canyon and had a back house, but the back house you could not shoot in. So the back house is a set. We painted the whole house. We added dirt in so there wasn't the concrete, but it all came off of this inspiration from this Crosby, Stills and Nash album, which I later learned wasn't even their house. You know, it was just for the album, but it was so iconic that I was like, that's it. That's what the house should be.
Yeah. Well, and Jess built that balcony up there that they actually had a scene in. It wasn't there. So, as with many period shows, there was a lot done to the locations. And Jess is not afraid to do things to locations, which is one of the things I love about working with her. She skinned the walls on the inside of the living room because we talked about wanting it to have a patina, and the house, even though it was a craftsman house, didn't have that. I mean, all of those locations were a complete redress. The band house was one of my favorites because, again, going back to the research, it was one of those moments where there's a throwaway line, which is a touchstone for that house, where they talk about ending up in the house because a woman died there and it was cheap. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, well, if this woman, was in her 70s or 80s in the 1970s, what would her furniture be? Most people buy furniture when they're at their heyday in their 30s or 40s. And so a lot of the furniture that was left over there was from the Art Deco era in the 40s. And I wanted you to feel the presence of that woman in the space when they first get there. Right. And also to refer to the fact that in that time period, as young people always do, they repurpose things from the nostalgia of their grandparents, especially because a lot of times that's what they would have found in a thrift store, and change elements that they can afford. So some of the pictures that we provided show like what the house looks like when they first get there, and then what they add. So, there's a moment where a peacock chair comes in, or there are shawls thrown over. We had curtains made for that house that were from period fabric. And then to lighten the feel of the house as they become more at home there, we took the curtains off and we left the sheer lace there to give it that lightness that you expect from the 70s. So there were a lot of little details that we really thought about a lot in terms of showing the character of the house itself, and then the character that the characters brought to it once they moved in and really started their life there.
What I love about working with Lisa, like that house, there was the story of who lived there, but in what was the dining room, she created this small sewing area where the woman like clearly had sat, and you get the idea that she died in that house. So it's like mid-process sewing with all this vintage like spools of thread and all of this setup as if someone was in the middle of doing it. Nobody asked for that. I didn't ask for that. But as soon as I walk in, like it's those details that I love that Lisa will hit, where you don't even realize the story that's being told because it just feels so right.
Well, they're spectacular. I mean, everywhere you look, just the layering and the detail is fantastic.
I like to think of set decorators as visual psychologists. and that was part of the fun of this set, was really thinking about all of those details.
Right.
This is the back house, which is the build that she was talking about. So you can see that we work to match the look of the house itself. I really wanted the through line for this space to feel like the beginning of home for Billy. And it was really important to me that the bed was in the corner so that it felt like a nest. And I think that the DP really used that very well. If you look at the shots of the space, you really feel that this is like the place that they feel safe and warm.
It's perfect. And you just totally believe that is part of that location.
One of the things that we did when we went from the back house to Billy and Camilla's house in the canyon, I really wanted it to feel like they had moved up in the world a little bit, but like you do when you move, you bring things with you from your last space. So if you go throughout the house, there are some key elements that were in the back house that are actually in this house as well. That, like that tapestry you see over this sofa, is the same tapestry that was in the bedroom in the back house. And there are a lot of little elements like that. I brought over a lot of the tapestries, a lot of the kitchen stuff, the kids' toys. But then there's some additions, like there's more art in here. There's not a lot of art in the band house on purpose. I wanted the art there to feel like it was left by the woman who used to live there. And anything they added was mostly posters because that's what they could afford. Whereas here, this is more of a space where Camilla really builds her family. And I wanted it to feel like as she has a line in the story where she says the band is our family, and I wanted this to feel like the heart of the family, the place that everybody loved to be. So there's more of a sense of like her aesthetic touch in here, but it still has the same like through line in terms of palette and overall look.
Jess, did you do a lot of work on this location as well?
You know what? This location was one of the few locations that from my end, it didn't ask that much of the guy. It was actually a 20-something-year-old guy who lived there, but he loved the 70s. So there were just things like remove this fence for this cool shot, like figure out where we can get lighting in a place that is this small, like walking around with the DP and figuring out like, how can I actually shoot? Because the one thing, it was up a whole ton of stairs. That was the only way you could get up. And it was a tight space, but we fell in love with it.
There was a lot of challenges with loading into this space because it was, I don't know, Jess, you think it was like 900 square feet? It was tiny.
Yeah, tiny
Space to get all the furniture in, up the stairs, down the ship's ladder, in the amount of time we had to dress, which was really tight. It was, of course, the only day that it rained on the entire shoot. So, there was no place to put any of the set dressing while you were dressing it. So, because it was at a hairpin turn in the hills, so everything had to be stake bedded in, and everything had to be covered in tarps on a terraced backyard where they shot the backyard as we dressed the set. So it was challenging.
It was tricky,
but worth it.
Yes.
In the end, you shouldn't ask me in the middle of it, but in the end, I was very proud of that set and I was very pleased with it. And I was actually really impressed by how much of it ended up on camera, because when we scouted it, I thought, I have no idea how the DP is not just gonna, see head and shoulders, because it was such a tight space. And I really was so happy with how he shot the scenes where they lost the power and used the candles. It was so evocative at the end of the day. So yeah, it was worth it. And Jess, it was worth it.
We were lucky with Checo, the DP, in that if we really loved something, he was open to hearing us say, this is why we are at this location, like this really speaks to us. What do you think? And what I also loved about him, like in that location where I said, we removed a fence, it was because he would come up and he'd be like, I have this shot where I want to carry her up the stairs. I want to push her in through the front door, but there's this giant custom wooden fence in the way. I want that wooden fence for my next shot, but I can't have it in this shot. Can you do it? But it was a great collaboration in that I think we got beautiful stuff you wouldn't normally get because we were both listening to each other.
I love that. That's really nice to hear.
It was. I mean, even like the set we were talking about before, the back house, I was very committed to having the bed in the corner for all the reasons that I said. And at first he was really worried about it because he was worried that he wouldn't be able to get around. And I talked to him about like why the bed should be there and why it would feel that way. And he really, you can see based on how he shot it, he really utilized it rather than fought it. So we were lucky that way.
I'd love to talk about Teddy Price's office and of course his home. What was some of the inspiration for that character and those sets? I mean, there's some amazing artwork in all those sets. Did you guys pull from local vendors? Did you have stuff commissioned?
So Teddy's character, I mean, they were all important to me, but Teddy's character was really important to me. We knew he was based on Quincy Jones. Also, he's really the father figure of the story. I spent a lot of time pulling research from Quincy Jones's actual house and then from like recording studios that he worked in. I actually happened to know somebody who used to work with him. So I talked to him about Quincy Jones and what his aesthetics were like. I really wanted his color palette to be evocative of African art, which was starting to gain momentum and respect in that time period, but still tie into our overall palette and not stand out and be separate. So we looked at Jet magazine and I looked at Architectural Digest from that era of like famous musicians' homes. I took classes on African art, so I had some of my own knowledge in that area. For me, the touchstone was the sofa in the living room, which is a Brazilian loafer sofa. I was determined to find it in that color. And my assistant set decorator, Ray Deslitch, when she started, I said, this is your task. I want a sofa that looks new, because you can find those sofas, but they often have a patina of age, as you know. And we wanted everything to look new. So she found the needle in the haystack. I mean, she looked everywhere, high and low, Cherish, all of those places. And believe it or not, we found it on Craigslist.
Oh my God, amazing.
The chair you see in the foreground is a purchase. It's a reproduction of the original design. The rugs in most of the house were from Modernica. A lot of the pieces were from Modernica in this house. I bought that surfboard coffee table, which has an iron brutalist base. I wanted a lot of brutalist elements in here too. They're here in hints. The artwork a lot of it came from Omega. Some of it came from Art Pick. We didn't actually have any commissioned pieces in this space, I don't think. We were just very, very particular about what we chose.
Teddy's and Elamar are my personal favorite sets. And I would say that because what you're looking at in this collaboration is us and our supervising art director, Brian. This is a genre that all three of us adore. Like, Brian brought in his own books from his personal library so that we could put together an aesthetic. Everything is so specifically chosen. If you were to like, what set, if you can only design one in the 70s, like, what would it be? And it would be Teddy's world. So not that nothing is ever easy, but this from a like creation standpoint, it was just a joy, because every time something would be built, when the windows were going up and they're slightly rounded in the office, you'd see the structure and the three of us would walk through and be like, this is exciting, and like, I'd come to look at Teddy's, and it's one of the few locations we actually had a decent amount of time to prep. So I would come in stages, and each time, one of the things that I love that Lisa does is I really feel like we share the same vision. So when we discuss it, I know that I'm going to get what I have in my head, because we see things in a similar vein. But what I love about working with her is that she always adds an element that I didn't think of that makes it better. So Teddy's, I came midway through the process and I was like, this is exactly what I was thinking. And then come a week later and I'm like, this is so much better than what I was thinking, like. It was one of those sets that, because we loved it so much, the entire process was very pleasing.
To me, this set shows how talented Jess is too, because the detail in the ceiling, and she found a reference for this like floating planter and was like, I'm going to run that through the entire space. And it looks amazing. The architecture of this space is elegant and sophisticated and sexy, without being like everything in the kitchen sink that's cool about mid-century modern architecture.
His desk, Lisa had actually fallen in love with on a different show we were on. And she had shown me these pictures, and ultimately we had decided that desk wasn't right for the show we were on. And she was like, it's going to be Teddy's, isn't it? And I was like, you're absolutely right. It's Teddy's desk. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Our goal was to create a gritty, real, textured, believable environment from this era, not a heightened interpretation of it. And most of our story lives in that world. His house and this set are really the only spaces in our world that feel sophisticated and sexy. I think one of my favorite moments on this show when we were shooting it was I was there to open set, and it's Tom Wright who plays the character Teddy Price, who's a lovely man. And I went up and introduced myself, and I said, I just wanted to say hello, and I'm happy to meet you, and I'm the set decorator. And he said, this is beautiful job on this character set. And that really meant a lot to me because I really wanted him to feel at home in his home. So
amazing. I read somewhere you guys took over a portion of the Sunset Strip for some of the clubs. I'm just wondering what actual venues and clubs did you use, and where did you do the Club McNasty's?
That was the Viper Room, which was McNasty's. We took over the block that has the Viper Room on it. So that entire side, and then the corner, Whiskey A Go-Go is Caddy Corner. So that was our outside world. What was exciting is there's this book, I cannot remember the name, forgive me, but a guy went and photographed the Sunset Strip, all the exteriors.
I think it was Ed Ruscha's book. I think that's what you were using.
I think you're right. Yeah. And so we had very good visual images. Because we were going to first see it when the band's driving into town, everyone agreed that this was something that we should spend money on. So like that Sunbeat Food Mart is like a 30-foot light box. And we made the custom Filthies neons, and like, I love everything about this because everyone agreed that this is someplace that we should commit to. So when this is the Viper Room, for example, there still is the stone up. It's just all black. And so it was just a matter of having our paint department make it look like its original state again. We essentially skinned 75% of that block. And in the end, we had one half of the block that managed to play for it in multiple times as long as Checo shot it carefully. And I mean, we got to shoot the outside of the Trube. And what's great about the outside of the Trube is all of the signage that you want is still there. The Trube looks as it is. The Whiskey looks very different. And there are massive ads that they will not let you cover. They will not let you put a green screen that rolls in front of it to cover. And so essentially that was me going back to post and being like, I'm gonna give you an entrance. You can use the back as much as you want, but you are going to have a major VFX here because I cannot touch it and they will not even allow me to roll something in front of it because they've sold that ad space.
Wow, that's amazing.
But for the most part, wherever you see a location, that location is what we did, with the exception of the Whiskey.
Right.
Yeah, but all of those bar and club interiors all had present day audio equipment and grids, and they wouldn't let us take any of it down. So a lot of what my assistant set decorator did was we would scout those locations together and make a plan for like different types of drapery. This drapery we can see in swag. This drapery has to be black and this has to be scalloped, and like diagrams and scouting with a draper to just, so much of the work that happened in those locations was stuff you weren't supposed to see, as opposed to the actual dressing that came in. Yeah, it was a lot of work just to hide everything that we didn't want to see on camera.
I really love the moment where Daisy walks into the club and plays the piano by herself for the first time. It's just, that whole sequence is just amazing and so on point. It's really cool.
What's funny about that is actually the second floor of the Whiskey that we basically, it's actually just a balcony essentially that we skinned one side of it to look like a club, because it was one of those, we got to have two things in one day. We can't handle the move. We don't have anything close. So that's also the Whiskey.
Well, and it was also, all of those clubs had crazy load-ins, right, Jess? I mean, my memory is that we had like all departments had one day to execute what needed to be done in each club, because they had just started opening up again after COVID, and they weren't willing to bump people from the schedule. And so it was one of those, everybody on top of each other trying to get the work done in time so that we could shoot it and get out in time.
Yeah, almost every club you see had a 24-hour load in. We'd shoot for half a day, and then you'd have until the next, like around noon the next day to get out.
Yeah. The Diamond Head Festival in Oahu looked like an extensive build and dress. I'd love for you guys to talk about that.
Well, that was exciting for me because it was our first big concert that wasn't in a venue. So, it was putting up a stage for the first time and getting a sense of like how big an actual stage is. And then also at this point, we knew from a VFX standpoint that we wanted to keep the VFX at our concerts as much as possible to people and not elements. So it was also trying to figure out how we create this environment that feels like a full environment on a budget, et cetera, et cetera. So like one of the things like the teepees are something I love because they're these structures that feel very 70s, take up a lot of visual space, pull you into this bowl that we created of our sort of world.
Also, some of the tents and the dressing around the outside, they're just amazing. The age on them, and they look so perfect.
Oh my God, one of my favorite things on them is the little ties that they added to all the structural rope that holds it up. It was not easy because it was the beginning of like one of our first of many weather disasters. So this was something where Lisa had to have it up, and then there was a windstorm and we had to take it down and do it again.
This was supposed to be at the end of the schedule. And then for week 2, we lost a location and they pulled this giant concert set up that we hadn't had time to prep. And luckily the UPM recognized that this would require more staffing. So I was able to bring in set decorator Andy Britton, who really helmed the dressing of this set. One of the challenges we found when we were doing Diamond Head, because most of those speakers were rented, is that they were real. And so of course they were heavy, and being able to rig them and then deal with windstorms and weather was a challenge. So we learned something from that process and made large dummy speakers in addition to the real speakers we had to create the look of the larger concerts.
We also tapped out at Diamond Head. Like that was all the vintage speakers we could get. It was one of those where Set Deck got down to details where Andy found, obviously the front of the speaker, but we'd see a lot of the back of the speakers as well. So she sourced all these pieces that we could put cables into on the back of our fake boxes, and those went 60 feet in the air. We had cables coming down from 60 feet in the air for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was really cool.
Everybody was committed to the level of detail,
That's awesome. Where did you guys actually build this?
This was out in Simi, just at a movie ranch, one of those where essentially I drove around and you begin to like get blind to everything where you're like, it's all just mountains. And we happen to come around a corner and it was in a bowl. And I was like, this is it. This is what we need. Something that will make it so that we have an end to our set.
And the bus.
I feel like the buses are one really deep dive into flower power. I think most of the show is not flower power and isn't psychedelic and this isn't our color palette really. It's sort of pumped up, but it did feel, this is a very joyful time when they're first getting on stage. And so we just sort of went for it in this bus. It's so heavily layered inside and exciting. And it's just a bus. It's just transporting from A to B. But it's one of those where everybody just sort of got on board and set dressing went nuts in here. You had, what cracks me up is sometimes when you have these like, 56-year-old dudes who really get into something and you come in and they're like sticking up tiny little pieces of fabric over the fabric. And this bus was one of them.
We actually had a set dresser whose name is Ron Volts, who, all of the set dressers were amazing, but he happened to be a roadie for Alice Cooper. That was a great addition to our team.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which actually brings me to my next, Lisa, Sound City. Where were you able to source all those period correct pieces from, recording equipment from?
When we started this project pre-pandemic, we sat down, myself and my assistant decorator, my 2 buyers, and we had like basically a class with Pam and her husband at History for Hire. And they were really indispensable to our education about the equipment in this era. Most of the equipment came from them. We learned a lot about how the equipment had changed from the early 70s to the mid 70s, how we went from 8 to 16 tracks, what the mixing boards looked like in the early 70s versus the later 70s. The fact that a lot of these recording studios would still have some of the older equipment in the room, along with the addition of the newer equipment. We spent a lot of time doing research on that. And we also had a binder just for Sound City of what Sound City looked like in 1970, and it went up through 1976. So we use that as a touchstone for the creation of this location. And Jess, why don't you jump in here, because I was so amazed at what she and her construction department did to this location, because originally she had a plan to build it and then we ended up at the actual location. So
Yeah, because I was curious. I know like a sound booth must be difficult to shoot in if you guys ended up building that portion, or how that worked.
No, it's funny because we actually have full plan and elevations of the set build we were going to do. And what happened is we did a final walkthrough with the DP and both of the directors. And one of the directors actually has a background in music videos.
Mhm.
And everyone was like, there's something about this space. Like, we just have to do it here, But what it meant was so much happens in the lobby, and the lobby of Sound City, as it currently stands, they've ripped everything out and made it totally modern. So it's, exposed ceilings, glossy concrete floor, white walls, and no rooms at all. It's just total open space. And
Right.
each of the other spaces has gone white with just, baffles on the walls. And so it essentially meant reskinning the live rooms and control rooms and then building a set within the lobby. It was a challenge for construction because we didn't have a grid that we could hold ceilings with, so they had to build these walls that would support the drop ceilings that we put in. You saw in the before pictures, it's white. They've covered every, all their baffles are really simple. And we were scouting one day and one of my art directors walked up to one of the biggest baffles on the walls and just pulled the cover back a little bit. And she was like, there's fabric under here. And that fabric that you see in that picture is the same fabric in a picture of Stevie Nicks recording in here. And it was in perfect condition because it had been covered for years. So we just uncovered it and that was there. Everything else got skinned and changed. But that was like a gift right there to get that vintage fabric.
yeah, it felt like sort of being anointed by Fleetwood Mac. Like, it's okay, this is great.
Yeah.
So people don't realize what we did to this set. They thought, oh, you just went there and shot it, which I know is annoying sometimes when we hear that as decorators, but it's also a compliment.
Absolutely. Yes.
So yeah, this one I'm really proud of what we did. We brought in all the equipment except for the boards. We also had a consultant that came from Sound City. I'm sorry, Jess, I'm blanking on his name. He also helped with some of the details about like how they would write all of the tracks on the tape, and the tape would go on the wall so they could put it back down when between cuts. And so we really did a deep dive into the details of this environment. I was really happy with how this all turned out.
Can I also just say reception? You don't even see a ton of it. You see a couple phone calls on it, but that represents my other type of favorite set that Lisa and I do together, because it's so perfectly layered and messy. Like there's the weird space heater on the ground and there's the fan tucked behind the plant, tucked behind this. And to me, this feels like real life because not everything is where it should be, but that's what makes it work. So when I see this one, even though there's so much to love in Sound City, this really tickles me because it feels like how life feels.
There's a ton of handwritten notes and fake business cards that we made. And we have actual photos of other famous bands from that era tucked in there. We have this really cute photo of myself and one of my buyers and one of Jess's assistant art directors. We recreated a photo of the secretary standing in the window that we found in our research. So, it's those little details that make it fun.
Absolutely. I mean, the details are what sets apart a good set and a great set. And this is Amazing. How closely did you guys work with the costume designer, and what were some of the biggest challenges you guys faced for the shoot in its entirety?
You know, it's funny. I was just on an interview with the costume designer. What she said is, she said, typically costume designers hate working with set deck. Like they'll come and ask us to fill their closet and we're trying to work on all this stuff and you just want them to go away. She was like, I did not feel that way about Lisa. It was a dream working with her. There is a scene where Billy they're playing at a wedding reception and she had these bridesmaids dresses in like this mint green that she loved. And so we based all of our set deck off of them, like that's the colors of the cake, like the colors of the flowers came off of them. We would send her all of the locations as soon as we picked them. And then separate from that, I know Lisa and her were talking all the time.
Yeah, I went into her office and photographed all of her boards because it was really important to me to see how she interpreted the character from a very early stage so that we could base on their environments on her interpretations as well. And I usually tried to give her a sense of where we were going and of course have those dialogues about color. But she did a ton of research, and every time I watch the show, I'm like, God, the costumes are so good. We lucked out. We all enjoyed working together and we had a really good collaboration. The scope of this show and what we had to pull off in the allotted time was quite daunting. I don't remember the total number of sets. I remember Brian just gave it to us. It was like 49 built sets and 89 locations in New Orleans and Greece, and the volume of it was crazy. I mean, the level of departmental structure that we both needed to pull this off was quite monumental. And because it was so location heavy, it was often the case that we would be, dressing multiple sets on the same day. I would be, in Long Beach and my assistant decorator would be on Sunset Strip and the other decorator was in Simi Valley. So there was a lot of, I'm very proud of the fact that it does have a visual through line, because to be able to pull that off with a number of moving parts, I think was really quite a feat. I meant to share this anecdote because I think it's a perfect analogy for how Jess and I like to work together. It's a motel in LA. It's a classic, like the furniture in there is late 60s. It feels like what motels generally looked like in that era. And Jess found this beautiful textured wallpaper that was like a blue-green pattern. And she showed it to me and I got really excited about it. And then I wanted to find fabric that would respond to it. And I gave that task to one of my buyers, and she scoured downtown and found this amazing fabric, which when the curtains are collapsed looks like it's the same pattern as the wallpaper, like they did in that era. And it was just, it's a perfect metaphor for how we like to work together. And so I just wanted to mention that because it's kind of a cool image.
Yeah, it's really, it was one of those moments where I walked in, I was like, what?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say thank you guys both, and a huge congratulations to you both. The show is stunning and you both should be really proud.
Thank you.
Claire.
So fun to watch.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Inside the Set with Set Decor. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website, setdecor.com.